Section 3. Immediately meaningful qualia? In trying to evaluate these various views on the relationship between qualia, intentionality, and meaning, I'm struck by the highly cognitive interpretation of meaning which they all generally seem to employ. Meaning involves producing accurate information about objects or states of affairs in the world in an objective, realist way. What's lacking, it seems to me, is an analysis using an alternative, evaluative interpretation of meaning. In other words, a search for meaning is not so much in terms of what is the state of affairs in the world, but rather what does this object or state of affairs mean to me? From an evolutionary point of view, this evaluative interpretation of meaning would certainly have been given priority in selecting the design of an organism's cognitive system, simply because an evaluate-first approach promotes survival and reproduction much more effectively rather than any effort to be neutrally objective. We can now revisit this question of the relationship between qualia and meaning from this alternative evaluative point of view. Starting from this interpretation of meaning, then the notion of qualia as directly and immediately meaningful makes more sense than does the continuum view outlined above, where meaningless qualia gradually accrue meaning as they progress through higher and higher levels of information processing. Again, from an evolutionary point of view, it is surely necessary for the survival of an organism for it to have immediate and direct evaluations of incoming sensory input, rather than waiting for this to emerge from successively more elaborate processing of the input as it ascends to higher levels of the organism's nervous system. However, as we saw earlier, there doesn't seem to be conventionally any explanation as to why these immediate evaluations should involve conscious qualia. And indeed, for many simpler species, such as insects, I believe that a lack of consciousness in this process is entirely unproblematic. But for higher species, such as mammals, many theorists are now arguing qualia do play a significant role. Beginning with the earliest mammals, and possibly birds, I believe that evolution did introduce consciousness into this evaluatory process. I further believe that the role of consciousness in this process is to permit an element of behavioral flexibility to intrude between stimulus and response. This element of behavioral flexibility works as follows. All mammals, according to Panksepp, are equipped with 7 basic emotional systems. All incoming signals from the environment are run past these for an immediate response. Given the organism's history, both phylogenetic and ontogenetic, these inputs will trigger good, bad, or neutral responses. This immediate fast reaction system operates in addition to the slower cognitive knowledge which passes through the higher centers of the brain. Notice that the fast reaction system relies on emotional responses. And according to contemporary researchers like Jaak Panksepp, it's not just the neurophysiological part of the emotions that's important in this system. The conscious subjective part of emotion, affect, is also important. This is because affect provides the rewards and punishments which guide learning and hence flexible behavior. Panksepp points out that although the behaviorists were keen to refer to rewards and punishments in connection with learning, in their theory, these were somehow transmitted direct from the environment to the organism, with no affect involved. Panksepp argues that it makes much more sense to see the positive or negative affect itself as providing the rewards and punishments. These affective responses may not immediately guide behavioral reactions in fast conditioned or unconditioned responses, but in the long run, they contribute to learned flexibility of behavior in mammals via, for example, the late error detection system described earlier by Jeffrey Gray. Another emotion theorist and animal researcher, Edmund Rolls, expresses this role of emotion as follows. He claims that the evolution of the complex mammalian emotional systems enabled genes to specify goals and rewards rather than behavioral responses themselves. Quote, "The theory that genes set many goals for action does not mean that our behavior is determined by genes. Modern evolutionary theory has led to the understanding that many traits, particularly behavioral ones, may have some genetic basis, but that does not mean they will inevitably appear because much depends on the environment. The power of the theory of emotion is that in evolution, genes specify rewards and punishers that are goals for action, but do not specify the actions themselves, which are flexible and can be learned." End quote.